In the cover art of this volume, we can observe a young girl that is unveiling the light that is behind a curtain that, interestingly enough, is made of stone. I found this image as very appealing and as very representative of the specific contents of this volume. She also grabs a violin in her hands, and what emerges from behind the light's curtain are musical notes. This volume is also subtitled Albedo. In the alchemical tradition, the albedo phase refers to the aspiration towards light and towards the origins of life. So if in the nigredo phase, presented in the former volume, we were kind of looking at nature with black glasses, in this volume we aspire to observe those tiny sources of light that nature presents in a very subtle yet decisive way. This allows us realization of the miraculous and creative powers implicit in nature, powers that modern society has naively believed capable of controlling, as I show in this book and in the next volume. The starting point for this modification of our optics is to realize, as presented in the former volume of Operative Traditions, that most part of modern culture defines the outer world as purely materialistic, without having any autonomy or self-determination beyond the so-called timeless laws of physics. What I aim to present in this volume is that such critical realization of the autonomous powers of nature is not a mere intellectual or discursive endeavor, or in other words, it is something one cannot simply learn in books. The only realization possible is of an operative type, which implies that one ought to directly relate to the techniques that characterize our time. This practice eventually builds up a vital relation where such techniques make use of human gesture in order to express their higher artistic meaning. It is only this artistic meaning what provides such critical inner realization. The artist is encouraged here to not only realize such truth, but also to create it, to build it. Now, today we are all very familiar with the concept of work as a way of making a living, as a passion, as a key ingredient of an economic system. Some even like to ponder if we work to live or live to work. Good question. So, in order to provide some substance to the answer, what I do in this book is like go in a time machine back to the Gothic medieval period, a time when the concept of work was radically different to today's and had a clearly spiritual and religious value. Although, strictly speaking, it is better to say that work had a cosmological value. In this regard, work was in the Gothic flourishing period an expression of being, and contrarily to today's views on work, it was inconceivable to separate one's style at work with the being one serves. This ethics of service was a key ingredient of work as well. For instance, it was inconceivable that one could ever work for oneself. This is, for exclusively satisfying one's individual material needs. Today we are ideologically persuaded to believe that work serves the material interests of the individual. Yet what I present in this volume is a much older and powerful idea, an idea that entirely impregnated the Gothic period and that referred to the fact that we ultimately work in order to build power upon the dynamics of the earth. If this power is not built, no economy is feasible and no work can be applied or organized. It is not about having economic resources available, it is all about how you build with such resources. In this volume, I explain in quite depth the energetic reasons of what I've just affirmed. But what is important to point out now is that this issue takes us to the selfsame concept of power. Power resides in the state. The state is an idea that becomes materialized, that is built. And we all work to produce such idea, whether we know it or not. Now, this might sound to many of you as extremely radical, but when I refer to the term state, I am not referring to today's state nations, such as France, Spain, Italy, not to governments, but to an architecture of power. Such is the Gothic ideal, the core ideal behind the magnificence of Gothic architecture. Now, this ideal allows us to put in context the dynamics of work and allows us realize that every time we work and intend to participate in creating something more powerful and transcendent than ourselves, it is then, and only then, that we can conceive our activity as opus, as a transcendent service. And it is along this practice that we can eventually discover the self-determining potentials of nature in our own senses, or unveil that which is often referred to in alchemical accounts as the lux natura. So once this extraordinary Gothic context is outlined, what I present to the reader of this book is a decline of the style of opus in work activities, mainly due to the influence of modern industrialization and technoscience, which both generate a progressive separation between the worker's skills and the final product of work. I mean, for instance, if today you ask someone what is their work, it is very rare to discover professional profiles that master the entirety of the techniques they relate to, mostly due to the extreme specialization demanded in today's jobs and corporate schemes. And yet such mastery was the Gothic ideal of work, a mastery that required often many decades of extremely disciplined apprenticeship and self-sacrifice in the realm of craft, arts, and architecture. And yet this decline of opus is never not an excuse. In the list, the last pages, the last section of this volume, I present an exposition of a type of science that aspires to recover that lost connection with the earth that was very present in Gothic times. Although modern culture has often referred to the medieval period as dark, it is precisely in Gothic culture where science was purely magical, in the most rigorous sense of the word. In this type of science, the potentials of human senses were awakened to such an extraordinary extent that human gesture served to express the meaning of the earth, the meaning of nature, and such meaning is purely symbolic. Such meaning transcends our conceptual and dialectical frameworks and allows all life to aspire towards its maximum expression. It gives life a project, so to speak, a project where there is always a light at the end of the tunnel, but a light that can be observed only to the extent that the life in the stone is first discovered, then pursued, and afterwards built, expressing architectonically the destiny of all living beings.